Well, good afternoon or good evening, depending on where in the country this might find you today. Welcome to Voile Canada's third IDE workshop in 2025 with looking at how the tools and support can help support you to move this work forward. We are going to begin with a land acknowledgement tonight. And we believe it's deeply important to acknowledge the territories on which we live, work, and play. So I'm going to share the land acknowledgement for where I live, which is in Victoria, which is the territories of the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich nations. And those territories are, to me, just a really beautiful place to be and to experience. And I feel like I have a real responsibility to learn about the histories of these territories and about the people who have been here for generations and the impacts of colonization on those peoples. And Victoria, for those of you that have been here, also shares a beautiful waterway. And so going and being on the ocean is one of my favorite places to be and to just experience the Salish Sea and to learn about how the peoples that Indigenous peoples here have used the waters and the sea as part of their harvesting and lifestyle for generations. So tonight I'm going to do a little intro of me and introduce Andrew, and then we're going to take you through a series of pieces of the content creation that we've worked with Voile Canada on over the last couple of years. So my name's Andrea Carey. I use the pronouns she, her, hers, and elle. As mentioned, I live, work, and play as an uninvited settler on Coast Salish territories. I grew up as an uninvited settler on Ktunaxa territories in the East Kootenays of British Columbia. And I identify as a white woman. I'm cisgender, and I have a 12-year-old little human who just raced off to ice hockey, which is her favorite sport. And so supporting her in her sporting journey. I also identify as non-disabled. However, I survived a brain tumor at age 17, which left me with some ongoing impacts as well as episodic disabilities while I was navigating that. And I come from Irish and Welsh ancestry, and I need to learn a lot more about that. So that's part of the journey that I'm on. I'm going to hand it to Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening or good afternoon, wherever you find yourselves today. My name is Andrew Paris. I use he, him pronouns, or il prononce ami qui parle en français. I am the digital media and inclusion specialist with Inclusion Incorporated. I'm really excited to get to share some of the resources that we've been working on with Nick and the Voile Canada crew. Helped lead basically putting the digital pieces together, if you will. So excited to share those and how you can best use them. I'm coming to you today from Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, also commonly known as Nova Scotia. I have a not so little human. He's actually bigger than me. He's 17 years old and is going through the university application process right now. And if you're lucky, this evening you may hear either Yuki or Hamilton barking in the background, whatever, one or both of my two beagles. So super excited to be here. And I'll hand it back over to Andrea.
Thanks, Andrew. One of the pieces we wanted to just check in and share tonight as we go through these resources is considering the learning journey that we're all on in the space of inclusion, diversity, and equity. And one of our ways we like to look at that is thinking about, from an internal perspective, doing your work to understand the things maybe you don't know in this space, and also recognizing that we're going to continue to learn as we go forward, and that there's many things on an ongoing basis that I don't know, and we don't know what we don't know. So part of our journey is to figure out what some of the things we don't know, and then to really check in and look at how we continue to learn forward. And I say learn forward very intentionally. So this bridge model, which is introduced by Rashika Telshan, who has a book called Inclusion on Purpose, is one of the ways that I like to think about this work and to share with the folks we're working with about the journey that you're on around inclusive mindset and kind of setting yourself up for how you're going to continue to learn in these spaces. So that B standing for be uncomfortable, and many of the topics that we navigate in the space of IDE can be uncomfortable. And so this is your opportunity to recognize that that might be a feeling that comes up for you, that might show up as curiosity, it might show up as shame, it might show up as defensiveness, but kind of thinking about sort of how you recognize that and then lean into that to continue to learn forward. The R stands for reflect, and reflecting on what you don't know, to my point about we don't know what we don't know, continuing to challenge yourself to learn and to understand and to seek new knowledge in spaces where you might not have knowledge. Inviting feedback. So as we go through this process and this learning, you may try to do things or say things and recognizing you might not always get that right. So inviting that feedback about how that landed for someone or something else that they feel you should learn, and just recognizing that it's an ongoing process in learning, and inviting feedback can help you understand some of those places where you need to continue to learn. The D is for defensiveness doesn't help, and defensiveness is kind of a protection mechanism that shows up for us when we get feedback that maybe doesn't land well with us, or someone calls us in or out on something that we've done. And so how do we kind of like lower that defense, get curious, take a couple breaths, and then ask some questions to seek to understand where you can grow and learn from there. And the next one is G, grow from your mistakes. And I feel like over these last 5 years in particular, so many people have grown from learning and from mistakes we've made along the way. I know that I often make mistakes in this space. And so I'm going to say both kind of that vulnerability and humility to recognize that you're on that learning journey, and then also taking that accountability to apologize and to continue to grow and learn from that. And then the E is expect that change takes time. Many of these topics are complex. They have deep histories in them. They're often kind of hard to unpack what might actually be happening. But when we think about how we can humanize the topic and take care of the person that is directly in front of you, that's a huge opportunity. So the larger changes will likely take a long time to shift systems and structures. And there's small things we can do in every single interaction to think about how we do less harm and take better care of the people in front of us. Andrew, anything you'd like to add to that?
Actually, we added in this other slide here, and it's a quote from Maya Angelou. And I really love this quote for a multitude of reasons. But this evening, I really want to emphasize, as we go through this process and as you or your club go through their IDE journey, it's really not about it's not about attacking, it's not about being negative, it's not about what's happening in the past. It's about doing the best you can until you know better. And then once we know better, do better. And if we can look at and create inclusive spaces like that bit by bit, one day at a time, then we can create clubs across the country from coast to coast to coast that are inclusive for everyone. Now I'll hand it back over to actually I'll hand it back over to Andrew. Yes.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so over the last about 3 and a bit years, as we've shared in our previous webinars, we've been working with Sail Canada, but really anchoring the work that we've been doing together in that vision of all people are able to connect with the natural world through sailing, no matter their identity, and without undue barriers to inclusion and accessibility. And this was work that your IDE committee did on behalf of the Sail Canada community, and is really meant to support and guide all of the work that has been taken since, and that Sail Canada will continue to do as you go forward. And huge recognition to the IDE committee and how they've undertaken that work and helped guide a number of different pieces that we're going to share tonight. So I just want to check in. Ryan, I want to hand it over to you because I believe you're going to speak to this next.
I am, and thank you. And unfortunate that Nick is feeling a little bit raspy tonight because I know he helped put those slides together, but we had a chat this morning and I'm more than happy to step up for this. And before I get started, I too want to just take a moment to recognize the importance of the IDE vision. I think we're a sport at the end of the day, and I think it can be easy for us to get caught up in racing and tactics and some of the other things, and perhaps some seasoned sailors can take for granted the connection to nature. And in my role, one of the questions that I get all the time from non-sailors is, how do I get on the water? And then how do I get out there and enjoy nature? So that vision statement really speaks to me, and I think it's central to what we do. So I'll take a couple minutes to speak to our investment in IDE. For one, speaking to the IDE policy, for those that haven't read it, functionally, it is about us holding ourselves accountable to ensure that we have proper representation at the board level, at staff levels, across our various committees. And our IDE action plan, in my mind, is our guiding light to help hold us accountable to that policy to make sure that we actually action it. And within that IDE policy, I think at the technical level and perhaps at the club level too, it also speaks to program development. And at the end of the day, Sail Canada is the governing body for the sport in the country. We make lesson plans, we make programs, we help create new opportunities to get Canadians on the water. And so having this IDE lens of, are we creating opportunity? Are we creating accessibility in the programs that we develop is central to that. So we've got the leadership part, certainly. We've got the action plan, and again, on the program development side, it's central. And then beyond that, within the IDE policy, of course, is language that we have around trans athletes and then non-binary participants, with the understanding that we have a limit to our jurisdiction. So World Sailing will take over as far as their policy goes for international competition, but the language that we have is quite strong for what I'll call domestic training. For this year, we're continuing the work that we've done with the Community Sport for All program. So still waiting in bated breath as far as what the feds will allocate to us for this year. But the Community Sport for All program, in years gone by, to date, we've helped get 700 new sailors on the water through these Community Sport for All grants. So we've put in for $1 million over the course of 2 years. So if we're successful in that bid, anywhere in the range of $500,000 for this program annually is equal to what we're pulling from Sport Canada for our regular programs, and also on par with high performance. So this is a big investment for us to take on. Obviously, if we're going to request funds, we also have to administer it. So it's a big investment for us to move out. But on the flip side, again, to the comment about creating access and opportunity, this, in my mind, is us putting real capital behind the IDE Action Committee. It has to be more than a policy. It has to be more than an action plan. It needs to be tangible. And if we're successful with our bid for that grant, it'll be big. I mentioned Nick at the top of the slide. He is our staff level dedicated staff member and promptly suited as the training and education coordinator. So everything that Nick does on program development side is also interwoven with the work that he's doing with the IDE committee, and really happy to have Nick continuing to move forward with that role, and we can tie that all up between staffing and Community Sport for All into actual tangible budget. I'm really happy, as I said, to be able to provide direct funding for IDE support. But why is this important? It's, we've got a great team at Sail Canada, and again, we just spend a lot of time, on program development. So having this commitment again at the policy level, as far as program development, IDE influences everything that we do. And again, we've got a really passionate team dedicated to helping get Canadians across the country on the water. So it is central to what we do. How we influence IDE, both at the national level, at the provincial level, and I think more tangibly at the club level, is an interesting mix of leadership and ownership. We're fairly far removed in Kingston from most other clubs, except for Kingston Yacht Club. So, how we influence the national dialogue and what it means to be clubs that open their doors to the community and not just open the door, but reach out to the community and invite new people in is central to what we do. So we, again, we've got the governance side, but I think just by facilitating conversations and workshops such as this, and then also to being able to put the Community Sport for All program and capital behind it is again, really inspiring, quite frankly, to hear the stories again of the 700 sailors that we've helped get on the water over the last couple of years. And with the investments that we're hoping to be able to make, we're actually hoping to double that. So if we can get up to 1,400 new Canadians on the water above and beyond the programs that we're already offering is monumental. And again, on the ownership side, I'll again commend Nick. He has dove in headfirst into this, and now in my capacity as the new chair of the IDE committee, I too am diving into this. I'm a side gender, able-bodied 40-year-old dude, so I can honestly say that I haven't had too many barriers as far as my accessibility to the sport. But with that, I also have to recognize and acknowledge my privilege in this space, and I really and truly am trying to be an ally to all underserved communities. And I want to again publicly thank Nick for his stewardship of me as I've gotten into this new role, and I again want to thank Conclusion Incorporated for the work that you've done in this space. So spoken a fair bit on the governance side. We have some IDE committee members on the call this evening, and I want to thank them for joining us. So the IDE committee is comprised of individuals from underrepresented communities across the country, coming to us for all types of different reasons, but at the end of the day, accessibility and opportunity, I think, is central to the conversations that we've been having so far. So they serve as a sounding board to me, a sounding board to Nick, as far as the policy updates that we're making, the programs that we're developing, and the other projects that we're thinking about bringing online. And again, kind of a gut check to make sure that we're going in the right direction, that what we're doing is resonating with the community, or with the committee, sorry, and also with that wealth of expertise also has brought forward some really interesting other ideas that we hadn't considered had we not had this committee stood up. So it's again, I'm saying that I'm relatively new to the file insofar as being the chair. Had one meeting so far, another one planned for a couple of weeks from now, or about a month from now, I should say. So again, want to thank the IDE committee for their commitment to this and for their volunteer time. I've spoken to the Community Sport for All grant a couple times, so we can skip that paragraph. I don't want to bang that drum too hard, but again, really excited to have that project moving forward. I think I have one more, Andrea. So to wrap this up, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of the call, and or at the end of the webinar, sorry. With respect to our policies and action plans, we do look back at these on a regular basis. Nick and I chat probably once a month. I've mentioned Nick a few times. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge Sam Crothers, who's our program and athlete services director, who plays a massive leadership role in this space as well. Between the two of them and certainly the rest of the staff, again, we do look at the IDE action plan in particular on a regular basis. It helps us keep energized and pushing forward through some nasty emails and some negative comments. And I know that I'm just reading verbatim. Unfortunately, I'm going to say due to the tone south of the border right now, IDE does have some negative connotations around it, which is really unfortunate. And unfortunately, we do get some negative feedback simply by sending out an invite for a webinar or a workshop such as this, which only drives us to be frank. At the end of the day, if there's a reaction to hosting a simple webinar, there's something behind that. We need to create space for conversations such as this. And again, our policy and our action plan hold us accountable to it, and I'm really excited to be moving forward. On the staff member support, again, spoken to Nick and Sam a couple of times here this evening. They help keep me grounded. They help keep me accountable to making sure that we keep moving forward with the action plan. And again, I want to thank the entire team for the work that we're doing.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for having us and Inclusion Incorporated join you on this journey. So, as mentioned off the top, this evening we're going to talk about some of the resources that have been created over the last year and a bit, and talk about how they're useful and why they're important. So when we look at this journey started roughly a year ago-ish, through the winter 2024 IDE series that I had the privilege of hosting. After that we developed 3 different infographics that I'm excited to share with you. And then over the summer, Andrea and team worked on a land acknowledgement guide, which was then followed by making some changes, not necessarily to the core content of the Learning Facilitator Guide, but to some of the language in there and some of the accessibility pieces in the Learning Facilitator Guide so that it can be more accessible and inclusive to all. And then, of course, that brings us to today, where we have another IDE workshop series that's ongoing, and we have one more session left to take place in a couple of weeks. Let's dive into it. Let's talk about the IDE workshop series that took place last winter. We had 4 sessions that took place, and you would think I'd include a better picture here of myself since it was me who helped build the slide deck, but here we are. We had 4 sessions that took place. One on the future of IDE and sailing, another one on how to welcome and what's welcoming new participants mean. We had a fantastic panel discussion to discuss gender equity and sexism within the sport of sailing. Still today, there were lots of pieces in the build up to that session and during that session that have stuck with me. And then last, but certainly not least, we dove in to anti-racism and really the difference between being non-racist and anti-racist. So what are they? There are videos that exist on YouTube, but there's a general page that they're at on the Sail Canada website, which I'm going to share at the end. In the future of IDE and Sail, we talked about the change in demographics in our country and talked about the business case for inclusion. Because while it is the right thing to do, there's also a business case to be made about our changing demographics, and we dove into that as well. And then we talked about what are some of the common systemic changes that we see within participation in sport, and more specifically participation within sailing. And we talked about what actually is inclusion, diversity, and equity. Because as Brian mentioned when he was speaking, we see a lot of conversations happening, especially on social media, especially south of the border, as to what inclusion, diversity, and equity are. And it tends to be controversial, but we talk about it at its core about how we can recreate systems and structures so that everybody can show up and be their authentic self. The next session that we did, we talked about welcoming new participants, and that was roughly a 40-minute video where we talked about how to put inclusion into action. Because one of the questions that I get often in this sports space is, Andrew, how can you make our sport more diverse? But the question is really, how can we make it more inclusive? Because diversity is a byproduct of inclusion. Inclusion is the work. Inclusion is the action. And during that session, we began to talk about practical steps to address some of the barriers within the sport. Next, like I mentioned, we had an hour-and-a-half session, a panel discussion about sexism in the sport of sailing and gender equity. We talked right off the top about how this sexism show up in sailing and create barriers. And for myself as the moderator, it was more of a exercising listening, if you will, to the fantastic panel discussion that we had of all the stories and experiences of 4 women in various levels across the country within the sport of sailing. And then we wrapped up that series last winter by diving into anti-racism. We first talked about how racism and power are interlinked. They're not one and the same, if you will, but they're they're interlinked and tied in with each other. We also talked about how does racism show up within sport, and more specifically the sport of sailing. And we talked about the difference between being non-racist and anti-racist. So rather than just sitting on the sidelines when something happens, using our privilege, speaking up, supporting the victim, the person on the receiving end of that racist comment or whatever it was that took place. So why are these important? It's important because it creates a baseline for discussion and action. A lot of times, and Nick and I, we've talked about this for several hours during this whole journey. We talked about how a lot of times we want to do better, but we don't know where to start. We don't even really know sometimes where to start and have that conversation. So these videos are a great opportunity for discussion. And of course, that discussion leads into action because once we know better, we do better, as we talked about earlier. It allows us also to begin to reimagine what does my club in BC or my club in Nova Scotia, what does a more diverse and inclusive sailing club look like? And of course, last but not least, and it ties in with the first bullet there, it allows the opportunity to clean our own house first, to take care of things internally before we go out and start to recruit folks from equity deserving communities, or really any community for that matter, before we invite them into our club. In terms of how they're helpful, it allows us to sit there and listen and reflect on perhaps some of the assumptions and biases that we have. And I want to be clear, assumptions and biases aren't inherently bad, but they can sometimes cloud our thinking, if you will. And we all have biases. I'm not sitting here and saying, all y'all have biases and I don't. So, no, it's not that at all. We all have assumptions and biases. And these videos allow us to park those biases, if you will, and to begin to think and get comfortable being uncomfortable, like Andrea talked about earlier. These are helpful because it allows us to review these videos and have conversations with your staff, your board, perhaps some of the members within your club. It also supports strategic growth within your club because one of the things that we talked about during a couple of the sessions is not immediately being everything to everybody, taking these out in bite-sized chunks, if you will, and doing a little bit at a time. One of the things that we had talked about during one of the sessions is what's something that you can do today that you look back on a year from now, and that just becomes standard practice within your club. So we think about it like that. And it also allows us to identify discriminatory and racist behavior and give some tools and strategies on how to deal with it. The way I like to explain this is what I consider to be respectful behavior may not be what somebody else considers to be respectful behavior. So it's one thing that you put in your code of conduct to be respectful, but what exactly does that mean? Do we have the tools to be able to identify disrespectful behavior when we see it? Next, we worked on infographic development. As a side note, selfishly, this is my personal favorite because I got to work on it from start to finish with our awesome team. Oh, I did another count one point in time. So we created 3 different infographics, and I'm going to walk you through each of them. We also have them in French. As a side note, si vous avez des questions en français, vous pouvez les mettre dans le chat et je vais les répondre à la fin de la séance. So if you have questions in French, I'm more than happy to answer them at the end of this session. Just by all means, place them in the chat. So we created 3, and there's a bit of, not in order, but we go on a bit of a journey with all 3 of them. So we created one about working with community. We created another one about what does it mean to actually be welcome, charting courses to welcome in shores. And then we went on a journey in the last infographic about building an inclusive sailing club. What exactly does that look like? This is the first one that we created. This isn't all the pages here. I didn't want to put them all in there because we could be talking well into the evening if I included it all in there. And Andrea knows all too well that I could talk about these forever and a day. But if you take a look at that first box there on the on the far left-hand side, you can see a little bit of a map there. And we really wanted to have something that not only was eye-catching, not only was simple, that you can either post within your club or you can look at it on your phone. We want to have something where here's the starting point and here's the end point, and let us walk you through that journey. So we started with understanding what is diversity and inclusion, and we took that all the way through to visual representation and attaining feedback to track progress. Because failure isn't an endpoint, right? We can't forget that. We don't necessarily want to fail, but we know that when we create new programs, sometimes we fail, but it's about failing fast and failing forward, and then going through that loop once again. The next one that we talked about was working with community. Because oftentimes when we talk about inclusion, we talk about inclusion in the lens of, okay, how do I market better to that group of Black Canadians? Or how do I market better to that Indigenous community? But it's not about marketing better. It's about having conversations with community. Nothing for us without us is a slogan that I use often, whether it's here or whether it's within my job. But we have to remember things like diverse communities are not are not the problem. Educating yourself before you reach out is absolutely key. And then actively listening to the needs of the community. And then, of course, it's a theme, if you're paying attention, collecting feedback in the end. So you can sort of see there with the animated sailboat that we have, we go from 1 to 2 all the way through to 6. And again, we want these to be as eye-catching as possible. And like I mentioned off the top, we also have them in French if that's your preferred or first language. And then last but certainly not least, because this was one of our bigger infographics that we created, we dove into what does creating a welcoming environment, a more inclusive environment look like? And again, we numbered everything. So we started with some definitions, if you will. So again, we're all on the same page so that we know what 2S LGBTQIA plus means. We know what it means to be an ally, or what is allyship. And then we went into some common barriers to diversity and inclusion and continued on to what does developing inclusive programming, not necessarily the nitty gritty technical part of it, because I'm not a sailor, although I'm really excited to go to the Canada Games this summer in St. John's with Team Nova Scotia. I'm their mission staff liaison with sailing. But again, I'm not a sailor. But what does developing that inclusive programming look like? Right. So it's a 10-page infographic. This one, like I mentioned, it's one of our larger ones. But we strongly believe that there's at least a couple of points in there, a couple of numbers in there that every club in the country can take away with and run with and help expand. And again, it's not about taking all this in at once, because I recognize there's a lot of information in just these infographics. But it's again, doing little bits at a time here, there, and everywhere. And then eventually get to a place where in year 2, if you will, things look a little bit better. Year 3, things look a little bit better, so on and so forth. So again, we can get to a space and place where everybody can show up and be their authentic self. So why are these important? Well, for an accessibility and reach, it's very engaging content for visual learners. I will fully admit, when I'm sitting here doing a webinar or workshop with folks, that's not always the most engaging piece, especially for visual learners. And we really want to be able to have a resource for those folks as well. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a math process, and we go through this step by step of things that your club can do. So if you don't know where to start at number 1 and work your way through that map. And within those infographics as well, there's some actionable steps. It's not just a matter of me pointing at you or the infographic saying, yeah, you need to do better. Because we know deep down that we all need to do better, myself included. But we're talking about some actionable steps to make that happen. And then It's very quick and digestible information. It's not like opening up an encyclopedia, if you will. I used that reference with a bunch of grade 11 students today. I'm not sure if half of them knew what I was talking about, but I'll park that. That's another conversation for another time. But having this quick and digestible information, again, you can pull it up on your phone. You can take a quick look on it because it's linked to the Sail Canada website. A couple of clicks, and you have that right then and there for you to be able to look at. And then lastly, how are they helpful? Well, this information can be easily shared, whether it's on your website, whether it's via social media, perhaps a newsletter, to really reinforce the importance of inclusion, diversity, and equity. These infographics can also be easily brought into perhaps any future training or education that you have, whether it's an orientation session with perhaps summer staff, an orientation session perhaps with new members, or training programs for that same staff. They encourage respect, understanding, and allyship amongst members. So we know that allyship is a verb, it's not a noun. One of those infographics goes into what does that mean to be an ally or allyship? And then it clarifies the why behind equity, diversity, inclusion, because again, we all come with different lived experiences, different assumptions, different biases, and it grounds us in why we're doing this work. And over time, that can reduce resistance to change. Again, I recognize I'm going through this super quick. If you have any questions out, by all means, feel free to place them into the chat, and we can get to those once we're finished. Next is our land acknowledgement guide that we worked on this past summer, and I introduced that in July. So there's just a little picture of the cover, but in terms of what it is, we talked about the importance of a land, waterway, or territorial acknowledgement beyond words. I'm reading this book. I have this book on my bookshelf here behind me called Unreconciled by Ojibwe author Jesse Wente. And he talks often throughout the entire book about how a land acknowledgement needs to be more than just words on the screen. How do we take those words and put them into action? We know that over the years, especially recent years, many folks have done land acknowledgements. But we talk about why land acknowledgements are important, when to deliver land acknowledgements, who should be doing it, and what are they? We also talk about some best practices when creating your own land acknowledgement. We talk about who are elders and who are knowledge keepers, and how to connect with those individuals in a respectful and thoughtful way. And then lastly, we included some template support in there for land acknowledgements, especially land acknowledgements in some of our bigger cities across the country. In terms of why it's important, it allows us to talk about the true history of our country. For the sake of full transparency, I turned 40 years old this year, and I've spoken with a few folks that when I was in junior high and high school back in the early 2000s, we didn't talk about this. My first introduction to the realities of how colonialism affected Indigenous folks wasn't until my third year of university, which was 2006, if I'm doing the math correctly. We also talked about the importance of recognizing Indigenous stewardship and rights. By using this guide as well, it also reinforces the club's commitment to reconciliation. And I don't mean just leafing through the guide, if you will, but taking that and again, putting that into action. It allows for how do we integrate these acknowledgements into all of our events and all of our programming. And then it can be used to, and I should put the word start in there, to help start building relationships with local Indigenous communities. Because it's not just a start and finish, it's a journey. In terms of how they're helpful, it allows your club, your facility, to create accurate and respectful land acknowledgements. Again, like I mentioned earlier, it allows you to strengthen your relationship with Indigenous communities. It also encourages environmental awareness and stewardship. It provides a clear and accessible resource for all members who perhaps are unfamiliar like I was with Indigenous histories and traditions. And then, of course, we're all about supporting your learning. So it supports that learning and also helps to support creating personalized acknowledgements. Next on the list is the CanSail Learning Facilitator Guide, which selfishly as a curler is something I would love to see one day in curling. But again, I will park that conversation for another time. But when we look at the Learner Facilitator Guide, it's not about getting into the technical pieces of it and tearing the whole guide apart and changing the way that the CanSail 1 and 2 programs are run, but it's about being inclusive, being more accessible. And in the guide itself, and I encourage you to take a look at it. Nick can provide it to you if it's something that you're interested in looking at, because it's not readily available on the website. But it dives into perhaps some accessibility needs that we perhaps didn't think of in the past. Within that document, within the document, we create a separate document that has over 30 recommendations and suggestions to help support learning facilities and creating more accessible workshops and how to integrate IDE right into the session. And that's important because one of the things that we have to remember as coaches, that our first job, if you will, is to create that safe environment. And we can never forget that an environment that is not inclusive, an environment that is exclusive, is not a safe environment. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the individual is being racist or discriminatory, but it's perhaps not something that we thought about in the past. For the learner facilitator, provide tools to create that welcoming and inclusive learning environment. Allows us to address perhaps some of the unconscious biases that we all have. And it allows us to better align with provincial, territorial, and national sport policies that we know are slowly but surely changing to be more inclusive. For the coaches, I love this especially because it prepares the coaches to support all athletes. Although we know safe sport is currently undergoing a bit of a change, it promotes some of those core safe sport principles. And the reality is a team that where everybody feels supported is a stronger team, and diversity can be a strength. So I recently spoke to a group of hockey players. They were U18 hockey players, and the way I explained it is that if everybody on your team feels safe and feels the ability to be able to show up and be their authentic self, then that's not something that they're worried about when they go into the ice, or in your case, go out onto the water. We can be one cohesive unit, if you will. And how is it helpful? Well, like I mentioned off the top, the recommendations themselves have been integrated directly into the materials. It also allows, it centers inclusion, diversity, equity as an important piece of the content. Plus, for new coaches, it allows them to have that IDE lens in their coaching journey early on. I know as a coach for a long time in the sports of curling, basketball, and baseball, we tend to develop some not so great habits over time. But if we take these IDE lens and build it in early enough, then again, look back on it in a year, 2 years from now, and it's just the norm of how we operate as coaches. So, like I mentioned, all of these resources are available on Sail Canada's website. So if you go to salem.ca, you can put in that address there at the bottom of your screen, or you can go to the education tab at the top of every page. I think it was on every page, and hit that drop down menu, and inclusion, diversity, and equity is one of the topics there, and that will take you to the page that's on your screen. Now, definitely going to open the floor up to some questions. But before I hear from some of your questions, I want to flip that around a little bit because I have questions for you. So some questions to think about is, how will your club, or how has your club use these IDE resources? Where do you see them helpful? And you can be as specific or generic as you want with that. From your perspective, what IDE gaps still exist? So we went through the infographics, we went through the land acknowledgement guide, we went through all these resources, including the sessions that we're having today and had last winter. But what gaps still exist from your perspective? Because it's not a matter of going from start to finish. And like Ryan mentioned earlier, there are budget restraints, and Sail Canada is doing a fantastic job of integrating this work into a budget. But what's next in your mind, if you will? And then we know from coast to coast to coast that there are some clubs and facilities doing some pretty awesome things as it relates to IDE. So, what has happened at your club as it relates to this? Was this a success story that you have? What are some promising practices that you have? There's just some questions to think about, if you will. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But before we open up the questions, just want to check in with Andrea to see if she had anything to add or if there was anything that I missed.
I think that was phenomenal, Andrew. Good job working our way through the journey of all the resources and tools. And I see people starting to engage in the chat. So let's open that up. And also, folks want to come off mute and verbally share some of how they've used the resources or where some of those gaps are, or what else would be supportive. We would love to hear from you. So you can put your hands up and come on in to share with us.
Absolutely. Just opening up the chat here. Some great questions in there for Nick. He has no voice, but his typing fingers are off and working. Thomas, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
How's it going, guys? Hope everybody's going well. So within my club, what we've been doing for the past little bit is kind of at the end of the season doing like a land acknowledgement and working with our local multicultural group to get the inclusivity and diversity in at the club and having people do activities and be social.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Thomas. And you brought up a great point there in terms of when we reach out to equity deserving communities, we don't need to start from zero. Chances are within your community, there's already a group or an organization that's working to support that organization. So that's a great point you brought up. Thank you for sharing that, Thomas, and kudos on the success that you've had so far. Anybody else? They don't necessarily need to be success stories, but if you have any questions, by all means, I see your hand up. Yes.
Hi. First of all, thanks for doing this. Last year we participated in the Sailing for All initiative, and we've reached out to community I'm from London, Ontario, and we have 4 of these local sort of community centers that specifically but support newcomers to Canada. And just by a freak chance, around the time that you guys sent out an email saying, hey, there's this Sailing for All opportunity, I just happened to run into somebody at work, just chatted with them, and they had just started working at one of these community centers. And I just said, you think people that you serve would have any interest in going sailing and coming out for an afternoon and just trying sailing? And he was in right as soon as I started, bringing it up. And so we ran 2 sessions last year that were both full day Saturday events. And so that was awesome. Everybody had a great time. But the more important part for me is from that, I was just looking at our registrations for some of our adult sailing lessons. And hey, there was 1 or 2 people that were on that participated in one of those Saturday events. So that was really cool to see. It wasn't just you always wonder, well, okay, everybody had a great time, what's going to come of it? And coming to our club, it's fairly small, it's a bit out of the way. It's an intimidating place for anyone to come to. Anybody who's, you said, Andrew, yourself, you don't sail. So nobody, everyone's, doesn't matter who you are, I think they're kind of always a bit anxious about starting something new. And so to have this person come and take lessons, to actually take the next step and sign up for lessons, I think is pretty awesome. I put in the chat, Nick was asking, is anybody going to take advantage of any of those resources? And to be honest, I haven't looked at too much of it this year, but I did while you guys were doing your talk. And one that did strike me was the one that says working with community sailing club partnerships for success. And the reason I think that kind of piqued my interest is last year in the fall, there was a club that was getting rid of their accessible sailboats, for lack of a better term. These are Hansen, can't think of the name right now, but anyways, we acquired them. They are in excellent shape. And now we're like, okay, what are we going to, yes, that's right, Hansen, that's right. What are we going to do with these boats? And how are we going to like get people coming here? And that's kind of where we are right now. And I'm really hoping that we get another Sailing for All grant, because what we decided is we're just going to learn the boats this summer, figure them out, decide what a program might look like, and then launch in 2026. But we thought we could use this summer, if we got a grant, that, okay, we'll reach out to some, again, people in our community, see if we can get some people coming here, maybe just for a Saturday, just for a day, and let's just test our equipment and see how it would fit in our program and what adjustments we'd have to make to accommodate that. So there you go. I talked for like 10 minutes and I apologize for that.
No need to apologize at all. Kudos on the successes that your club's been having. You brought up a couple of great points, and I know Thomas has his hand up, so I'll just bring up one of them. But you talked about how a member that was in one of your programs last year signed up for the Learn to Sail program this year. And it's important to note that success doesn't always look like dozens and dozens and dozens of newcomers or folks from equity deserving communities sign up for your program. The reality is that one person signing up is a success in and of itself. And then maybe next year it's two, and the year after three, or maybe it's just one, and one. Regardless, that's still what it means is that your program had enough of a positive impact on that one individual to want to come back and sail again. So that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
Sorry, Andrew, can I just add to that? Because as you were saying that, one of the pieces that was percolating for me was I do a lot of work with Indigenous communities. And one of the leaders that I've worked with for a long time said to me early in that work that participants vote with their feet. And so if they keep coming back, that's also a really good indicator. So not even signing up for the next thing, but just continuing to show up. So kind of think through that in terms of how you support that success and them feeling like this is a place they want to be and where they can belong. Thomas, over to you.
Yeah, I was just gonna add on to that. I feel like with people coming back, it's about kind of sometimes it gets with commitment, and people have jobs, and things get messed up, and weather comes in and it holds up dates, and it just goes back and back and back. And I find what we do as a club up north is we kind of make other alternatives. We go. Let's say go watch sailing or talk about sailing or go do knot tying or engine maintenance, kind of as like these tiny clinics.
Oh, that's awesome. Other parts of sailing that, honestly, I would have never thought of on my own, but obviously engine maintenance is just a little bit important, for sure. Thank you for sharing that, Thomas. Anyone else? No pressure at all, but I love hearing about success stories. I also love being able to answer any questions they have. No questions too big or too small, if you will. Yes, Augustine.
Hi, everybody. First of all, thanks everybody for putting all this together. Just maybe this was asked already, but wondering if any clubs or organizations have had any success, with when it comes to advertising or trying to be more inclusive, and when trying to advertise, not actually getting the feedback or the take on that they were hoping based on all the the reputation of sailing not being the most inclusive sport per se. So I wonder if there's any success stories when it comes to like the communication aspect of any events that are trying to be more inclusive. If there's any advice that anybody would have on that end.
Absolutely, great question. Thank you for asking that. I'll leave that open in the chat as well. In terms of just how do we market to new folks in general? What have been some of the challenges or successes there?
If I may, I'm actually going to go back to Giles's point on the importance of reaching out to community groups. I think having a community partner or a champion, if you will, to help echo the marketing initiatives is something that I've seen quite successful in a number of different cases. So, Og, to your point, marketing is certainly one part of it. But when it comes to community partnerships, finding that community champion who can speak to any question that may come up as far as, is this scary? Is this only for the rich? Is this only for the private members of the world? And trying to knock down some of those barriers and ultimately bridge some gaps is something that I've seen to be successful. And I see Giles has his hand back up, so we can do a little 1-for-1 here.
Just going to go back to that story of these newcomers, and just to emphasize the point that you just made. If we did not connect with this community leader, I guess, this person who represented this group, this organization, we had some assumptions. And one thing that we thought is, okay, newcomers, youth, and at the same time, we were also thinking about the male, female thing. Maybe some people don't feel, I don't know. We just thought, you know what, let's have a Saturday that would be just for females, and one Saturday would just be for males. And the guy from the community center said, that's not going to work. These are newcomers. They're here with their families. No one's, anyone who goes, they're going to want to go with their brother or their sister. They're not going to want to go alone. And that was true. And when we did look at the people who came, a lot of it were siblings. Not everyone, but a lot of people were like, they were together. So instead of us making an assumption, which we did, and he corrected that, and it's because of his own awareness of the group of people that he was working with. So I think that's just an example why it's important, not just to send out flyers. Hey, we don't target these people. Let's drop some flyers off at their local community center and let's see how many people sign up or whatever. It was reaching out and letting somebody else do the marketing or the communication for us.
So that's a fantastic point. Like, what marketing can look like is building that relationship over time. So it's not necessarily a poster per se that maybe we created on Canva, but it's building that relationship and having open and honest conversations about perhaps what are some of the barriers to that specific community and taking part. Thank you for that. I know it's 1 minute to the top of the hour, so just before we go, I wanted to plug that we are back again in 2 weeks' time on the 18th, same time, same channel. And our next session is you've got questions, we have answers. So it's a bit of a ask us anything, if you will. We may not have every single answer, but we will try our best to answer as many of those questions as possible. I encourage you to get your questions in beforehand if you can. So I'm sort of breaking protocol here, but I'm going to say if you have questions, send them over to Nick. Nick has no voice, but like I said, he's got those fingers typing. So send them over to Nick, and we'll answer those questions as best we can, or bring them to the session raise your hand like Henry has, and we can answer those questions then. But I know it's top of the hour, so if you have to leave, by all means, feel free to do so. It was great having a conversation with you today. I'll hand it back over to Andrew before we go to Henry's question.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Hi there.
And yeah, I'm gonna suggest that if you need to jump off, jump off. But Henry, we're gonna give you space to ask your question. We'll stay on for another couple minutes to address whatever your question or comment is.
Sure. My name's Henry Ralphel. I'm with the Dartmouth Yacht Club. That's in Halifax. And if you don't know the geography of the place, there's three fairly large yacht clubs, and we have a WOW program, which is called Women on Water. Maybe there's a the in there, and they've had quite successful meetings in that all the three major yacht clubs get together, and they've had advertising about it, pictures about it, and successful meetings. Of course, I don't know what goes on in those meetings because I don't get invited, right? And if anybody has that situation where there's a few yacht clubs together, you may choose to look up WOW at the Dartmouth Yacht Club, and perhaps there's a hint for you, something like that. Thank you for your time.
Amazing. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you, Henry.
And thank you to each of you that engaged in tonight, both as attendees and sharing your thoughts in the chat or verbally. Huge thanks to Andrew for leading us through the session, and to Nick and Ryan for helping us prepare and supporting this incredible work, as well as to our IDE committee, some of whom are on here tonight. So big thanks. See you in 2 weeks, and we look forward to those great questions.